Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is photographer and author of Endangered Beauty. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
This book is a work of over 20 years of collection of wildlife. So can you tell us how you started? And was it safari or?
Oh, no, this is all Illinois images. I was working for a magazine called Chicago Wilderness way back when, and they inspired me to go out and photograph rare species. And it just turned into this big project where I thought, well, let's see if I can photograph them all. Now, I haven't photographed them all.
Yeah.
There are 483 or so endangered species in Illinois, and that number changes every 5 years as the list is reviewed. Some species come off the list, some species go on the list. But when I started, it was 483. So that's the number I quote.
Number.
It's a huge number. And I photographed about 160 so far.
Wow.
And all of those are in the book.
And yes, my goodness, I still can't get over that number. So did you, at that time, were you prepared to go after these animals? I mean, they could be very hard to find.
They're
right?
they're endangered. They're really hard to find. And in the beginning, I was much younger and had a lot of enthusiasm, and I just reached out to the people who I had met through the magazine, the people who were contributing stories and talking about the endangered species and the programs that they were involved with that were helping. And I thought, well, let me contact them and see if they'd even be willing to take me out and show me these species. And the response I got was overwhelmingly positive. They, sure, come on out, be happy to show you around. And I got involved with so many great organizations. It was amazing.
Like
and
Audubon?
Well, with Plants of Concern, who's part of the Chicago Botanic Garden. They monitor hundreds of native plants that are rare or endangered.
Yes.
And so I've been working with them probably the longest, and 2/3 of the species on the list are plants. So they've been a huge help in helping me find these plants. I mean, some of them are tiny, and there's 3 or 4 plants in hundreds of acres. I mean, there'd be no way I could find it on my own.
Right.
So, but coordinating with the volunteer to take me out when the plant's in bloom and finding it. Some years they're there, some years they're not. So it's a lot more challenging than you would think. Just, let's go out and get a picture of this. It's is the weather right? Is the light right? Is it windy? Is it too wet? Will we even find it? Will it be in bloom? So
were you out there for hours?
Hours and hours, hours and hours. And then, some of the hardest ones were things where I couldn't have somebody help me, like the Heinz Emerald dragonfly. People could direct me to where it was, but nobody could say, here it is. I had to find it on my own. And that one took me 3 years to find. I'd go out to the place where it hung out in Illinois, and I would go week after week after week. And, I might have seen it flying by, but it has to land. I have to get a picture of it.
Yeah. So you drive all over Illinois?
I drive all over, yeah. Most of it, though, surprisingly, I think 3/4 of the species on the list are in Northeast Illinois.
Oh.
So I've had quite a few opportunities to photograph right in the northeast part of the state. So I haven't had to drive too far. I've gone down to the Kankakee area, and I've gone down to southern Illinois where there's more endangered species. But for the most part, I've just gotten all of these not too far from here, and actually quite a few in Glenview.
Yes, tell us where you shoot in Glenview.
Well, I live right near the Techney Basin, which is a birding hotspot, and I've actually photographed several of the endangered birds right there at the Techney Basin and at Air Station Prairie. So
and how about the Grove or the forest trails? Or
the Grove has some great birding and plants, and Also along the river, all along the river, the West Fork, the North Branch of the Chicago River has some great birding. And Lake Glenview, there's been some rarities showing up at Lake Glenview. Even Lake Glenview. It's amazing because of all the wonderful native plants that are around the edge.
And
And
prairie
the
restorations, right? We've seen
restoration
that.
efforts, and they've stocked it with native fish, and it attracts a wonderful amount of wildlife.
Wow, who knew?
Who knew?
When
Yeah.
when we pass by, when we're jogging and we see it,
Exactly.
we didn't know it was so special.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm hoping that they'll continue to encourage more restoration efforts and plantings, and I know they burn around there, so it's a great job.
Now these pictures, how was it to put into a book? I mean, that must be hard to organize. Do you go seasonally or alphabetically?
Well, that was the challenge, was how do I organize all these photos so they make sense? And what I wound up doing was I organized them by habitat.
Oh yes, okay.
So that did raise some other issues because some of the plants or animals could be found in multiple habitats. But after conferring with some experts, we located the most likely habitat and made notes throughout the book saying, they could be found in other places, but for the flow of the book, I created a prairie section, and within the prairie, there's subcategories for mesic prairie and gravel prairie, and some of the other prairies, and then there's a wetlands, and the wetlands is divided into different types of wetlands, marshes and bogs and fens and things like that.
And then
And-
by the habitat, you list them by, I guess,
Just
birds or reptile
Well, I
or
put them
insects?
together in groupings that seem to make sense visually, because it's mostly a picture book. So
yes.
I found pictures that worked well together, and that's how they're grouped within their categories.
It does seem that cameras have changed so much within the last 15 years. You say yourself you use manual, and now you've used all forms of cameras.
I have. Well, it's interesting. Since the book is photographed over 20 years, there are pictures in the book with film, from slides that I've taken, and every digital camera that I've had over the last 20 years. And I think you'd be hard pressed to say, oh, this is shot with film or this is shot digitally. A good picture is a good picture regardless of the camera that you're using. So
Is it easier now to shoot
You
with
know,
the automatic lenses and
I've improved as a photographer, and my standards have changed, and what I might have found acceptable 20 years ago, I would toss now. So I think it's my own aesthetics that make it just as challenging now as it was 20 years ago, because I'm always looking for the very best picture that I can take at that moment that captures the mood and captures the habits and tells a story. So.
and so many let's see, the availability of high definition photographing and on screen right now we have all these amazing quality photographs. I find the coffee table book has a lot of appeal.
Well, it does. And some of the interesting things people said, they saw my pictures online as I was, working on the book. I would post pages and things. And the comment that I got most often when they received their book was how three-dimensional the images looked in their hands as opposed to on the screen. So there's a real depth to the printing. And you can also get in and see the details really well in the book. So it's amazing. We went, top notch with the printing, and I printed it locally in Barrington, Illinois, with a printer that we used the finest inks, the finest paper, the best dot patterns, a lot of technical stuff, but.
Right. But tell us a little bit about that, because I hear from other authors that printing a visual book like this is expensive.
It's very expensive. I had planned to do the book when I created the exhibit. I created an Endangered Beauty exhibit about 3 years ago.
I see.
And the plan was, at that time, was always to do the exhibit, and then after you see the exhibit, you could, if you wanted to take home a book and learn more about it, it would be available. But I realized the cost of doing the book was more than doing the whole exhibit. So it took me about 2 years to raise the funds through advance sales and other donations through my not-for-profit to raise the money to do the book. So I finally was able to do it last year, and it was released in October.
So when people buy this book, they're not buying the true cost. They're only buying partial, right?
Correct.
Ah, I see. That's amazing. That's amazing. You have to plan for that.
Exactly.
And the page count, right? Because
exactly.
the cost is for the color pictures.
Right. So I worked with the printer, and I said, what's the maximum size I can print the book and still keep it on a sheet. So there's 8 pictures on a sheet. So my experience with printing other things with this printer has really helped out. So I knew how books are printed, and I said, okay, give me a size, and then it's all by 16 pages. So there's 16-page signatures. So the book is a multiple of a 16-page signature, and we maximized the sheet size. So that's how I came up with the size of the book and the number of pages. And I printed it as economically as I could, but doing it with all the highest quality inks. I thought, if I'm going to be printing this book, I don't know if I'm going to do another one. I wanted to do it the best that I could. And if it meant raising an extra, amount of money, then that's what I did. And people really stepped up. My friends stepped up. I had a GoFundMe. People pre-ordered the book, and it was great. So I was able to do that.
So you have previous experience, Carol, with this print shop. You said you have printed calendars before.
Yes. I've been doing. In Beauty, I Walk calendars with Graphic Art Studios in Barrington for over 20 years now.
I see.
And they've worked with me on greeting cards, bookmarks, calendars, you name it. And they are amazing. And I could not imagine printing this book anyplace else. And they also helped out. They donated some books.
Wow.
They provided 250 overs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I ordered a certain amount of books, and then they gifted me extras.
Yeah.
From the press run. So that was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with a visual book like this, do you find it's pretty easy to do social media?
Well, it is. It's
Because I found you on Facebook.
Yep. I have a website for Team Green, a Team Green Facebook page, and then I've got my own photography page, and so I do cross-promoting. And
Are you on Instagram?
I am on Instagram, but I'm not really active on Instagram. It's just one.
Yes,
too many things. Yeah.
Every platform is like I don't know, tending a garden, right?
Exactly.
We all have to limit our time to make it work the best for us.
Exactly. I would say Facebook is probably the easiest one for me to connect with people and for people to find me. That's where I've been active the most, and I have some wonderful people who comment and are interested in what I'm doing.
But tell us about one of the pictures in Endangered Beauty that was particularly maybe difficult or fun to have taken that shot.
Well, they all have interesting stories, and actually in the book there's little stories for some of the more challenging species to photograph. And one of them was this beautiful orchid I went to photograph, and I met up with the steward who was going to take me to this secret location. And he said, well, I just want to let you know there's a lot of mosquitoes.
Oh,
And I'm like, well, okay, I'm a professional nature photographer. I'm wearing, gear that's soaked in,
yes, detent, yeah.
and, I have it professionally treated clothing and
Yes.
all that stuff. And I've got,
Screens and
yeah, I've got all kinds of
gloves,
stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, no problem, mosquitoes. I deal with that all the time. I was not prepared for this. We pulled up to the spot and the mosquitoes swarmed the car
Oh my gosh.
and the windows turned black
Oh my gosh. That's
with the amount of, I was like, holy cow. I was not prepared for that. I'm like, okay, fine. So he said, oh, well, they're just attracted to the warmth of the car. So I'm like, okay, fine. So we get outside. I spray up even more. These mosquitoes were relentless. I had to muster every ounce of Zen that I had to focus on what I was doing and not, because they're buzzing in your ears. They were going for my eyes. They were attacking my hands. They were eating me through my clothes. It was the most intense. It was probably only 10 minutes, but it felt like forever.
Right.
I was like, I
Oh my
wanted to
gosh.
explore and take more pictures because there were
Around
orchids
the
all
area.
over. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a magical place, but I was literally chased out by more mosquitoes than I have ever seen in my entire life.
So was it any kind of time issue? Was it because it's evening or daytime? Or
Well,
apparently
this
not?
particular orchid likes a wet environment.
Of course.
So, and we had a particularly wet spring, and that just produced a bumper crop of mosquitoes. Yeah.
Oh.
And they only bloom for a couple weeks, so I had to shoot them then.
Yes, they're
Or
very
they'd be
seasonal.
gone, yeah.
Right.
So
Wow, that is one brave story. I think most outdoorsmen, the biggest outdoorsmen, would have ran away from
so I was
that.
lucky I got the picture that I did. So I was very happy. And if I get the chance to go back on a less mosquito-y season, I would enjoy that. But
Wow. And how about the terrain? Is there any terrain that was particularly dangerous or
well,
muddy?
that's
or,
a good part of Illinois is we don't have too many
swamps.
dangers. Probably one of the most challenging ones was photographing the fish.
Oh, yes.
How do you photograph fish? Well, I was in contact with the naturalist who did the restoration of these 5 endangered species of fish up in Lake County, and he agreed to take me out.
Is it about the Channel of Lakes, that area?
It's in a lake in a community where they actually had a pilot program to see if they could restore these 5 endangered species to this little lake. And because I'm not allowed to collect or hunt these little fish, so I had to go out with the naturalist who had all the permits and also knew how to safely capture the fish. So we're out there with hip boots and nets and wading through this lake and seining up the fish and I brought little containers with some gravel so I could photograph them. So
against some kind of background, right?
Right. So we got them out. I was able to photograph them, and then they were all released back into the water, all unharmed. So, but he's like, when I saw the list, I'm like, well, how am I going to get fish?
Yes. So how do you?
Exactly.
And birds too.
The birds, I just have to
they're shy.
I just have to find them. Yeah, I follow reports, and so I've had to learn about plants and insects and birds, and it's been an incredible learning experience for me and such a privilege to go out with experts when I have the chance.
So can we add naturalist to your title now?
Well, I call myself a naturalist photographer. So it's not just any flower. I learn about it. I can identify it.
For birds, do you use a longer lens?
I do use a longer lens,
because they're so shy.
They're very shy, and it's always nature first. And if I can get a good picture, great. But I'd never want to harm the landscape, harm the plant, harm any neighboring plants, spook the bird, anything. So if I get a less than great picture, then I get a less than great picture. But the nature always comes first.
Do you also videotape these?
Occasionally, I do take some little videos and put them up.
I think
I'm doing
birds
more.
would be so it's so tempting to do video instead of just
It is.
because it's harder practically to take a picture of a bird than the
It
video
is.
of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's nice to show the behavior when you can do that. And when I'm photographing the plants, I'm always looking for the pollinators and other insects or
yes.
whatever connections I can make. I'm always looking for that. I was lucky I got one picture of this endangered butterfly on the endangered plant that is his host plant. So it tells a story.
Yes,
Yeah.
the semiotic relationship.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So I'm always trying to do that. And I point out some of those things in the book.
Well, this sounds like a very rewarding and enriching experience, not just for your reader, but yourself as well.
Oh, absolutely. It was, I can't stress enough how amazing the people that I met. Now, it's like people are like, oh, the plants, the insects. I'm like, yeah, but the people who helped me find these species and took their time out of their very busy schedules. I mean, sometimes hours out of their day to, take me out into the middle of nowhere and help me find this plant. And they were delighted and happy to do so. It was so touching and so amazing for me. And I've thanked them all in the book. And I could not have done it without them.
Well, there are hours of observation, and knowing the habitat or knowing the habits of the animals is nothing you can read about right? To be able to substitute that knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about Glenview. So you've been a resident for 20 years.
Over 20 years, yeah.
And what do you enjoy about Glenview?
Well, I'm so lucky where I live is right near the Techni Basin. So almost every evening, weather permitting, and sometimes even when the weather's not that great, I'll go take a walk around the basin. And we have endangered black-crowned night herons nesting right here in Glenview. Wow. And they show up from time to time at the Techni Basin. So, and during spring and fall migration, you never know what's going to show up. I've found rare species and endangered species just on my evening walk along the basin.
So walking is one way to the best way, perhaps.
I think so.
We drive by and we don't see anything, right?
Exactly. Yeah. One of my sayings is you have to walk a prairie to appreciate it. When you drive by, it looks just like a field of weeds. But when you walk through the prairie, especially early morning, and it's dewy, and the insects and everything are just waking up, it's magical.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean,
But
you also make us think about how 19th century or 18th century people did see fairies, or they think and that's we see why, right? We can relate to that more if we took the time.
Oh, definitely, definitely, and like I said, Glenview is lucky to have places: Harms Woods, the Grove, Lake Glenview, Air Station Prairie, Techni Basin. They're all wonderful places, and I think they're looking to always acquire whatever land they can and improve
the Grove
it.
has expanded, and they always try to, return it to the native plants.
Exactly. And, excuse me, people can volunteer on work days if they want to come out and help and do some brush cutting or seed collecting. It's open to everybody who wants to come out and help.
Yes. So my children were younger, we would go to collect these, what they call invasive plants, and these things are wonderful things to do together.
It is.
And another question for you for your book, Endangered Beauty. What do you hope for the endangered species in the future?
Well, I guess what I wanted to do is really showcase Illinois' endangered species. And so many people say, oh, well, you shoot endangered species, you travel all over the world. I'm like, all over the world, I can go 5 minutes away and find an endangered orchid. So I want to raise that awareness that there are endangered species everywhere in your own backyard, and to show people the wide variety of species and habitats that we have right here in Illinois, and that they're worth protecting and worth supporting. And I encourage people to get out and vote and support people who are putting the environment first, because without the environment, it's not going to be a very pleasant place for any of us to live in the future.
Well, thank you, Carol, for being on our program.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.